I think this might be where I turn it back over to Jen.
Okay. Next question for Duradarshini. What are the plans for social distancing and occupancy limits for high traffic areas? So everything, classrooms, offices, shared spaces, bathrooms, elevators.
Thank you, Jennifer. So we have been conducting space analysis campus-wide, and in order to determine occupancy limits, we've been applying social distancing guidelines recommended by CUNY and by CDC. These are based on ventilation, the type of ventilation we have in the spaces with which Carrie and Joe are going to speak in more detail about later. Basically, for spaces with mechanical ventilation, we're using a 6-foot safety margin around each person to determine maximum occupancy. And for spaces with less than optimal ventilation, we're using 12-foot safety margins as per CUNY's reentry guidelines. So Marcus, if you can pull up the slide, please. Thank you. So these are two examples of different classroom types, an auditorium and a typical smart classroom with tablet armchairs. So on the left, you see Woody Tanger, normally seats 144 people. If we maintain a minimum of 6 feet between seats, it can seat 19 people. On the right, you have 2615 James, normally holds 25 students. With a 6-foot safety margin, it accommodates 7 students. So because occupancy with social distancing is often referred to as a percentage of full occupancy, I wanted to clarify that this percentage, it depends on how densely this space is occupied during normal use. So auditorium seating is high density. So for Woody Tanger, the socially distanced occupancy is like 14% of normal occupancy. But for 2615 James, the socially distanced occupancy is 28%. Okay, so but for both spaces, we're applying the same 6-foot safety margin. So the percentage it's a way of quantifying or measuring the resulting occupancy, but that's not our basis for planning occupancy. So we're not like taking 50% or 30% of the normal occupancy. We're looking at the 6-foot safety margin, if that's what's required, or a 12-foot safety margin, if that's what's required. So similarly, we're using the 6-foot and 12-foot safety margins, depending on ventilation, in order to plan occupancy for all the other kinds of occupied spaces, lounges, labs, shared office spaces. And for hallways, by virtue of limiting the overall capacity in the building, so hallways and other common spaces will be less dense. And as Carrie said, we have a lot of visual cues for social distancing, a lot of messaging, 6-foot markers, directional arrows, throughout the buildings. Bathrooms and elevators. In the buildings and floors that are currently in use, maximum occupancy levels for the bathrooms and elevators have been established and they're posted. Like in the bathrooms, some stalls and fixtures have been taken out of service temporarily in order to maintain social distancing. And this is going to be done across campus for all the buildings, all bathrooms, all elevators. So that's our approach.